We're now going to take you live to Atlanta, where the Libertarian Party is holding its national convention this weekend. We'll have a debate here for the candidates for the party's presidential nomination. It just got underway. Here's our live coverage from the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Atlanta.
Thank you. Thank you. And welcome to Atlanta. I'm going to introduce each of the three candidates who are here for today's debate, and as I introduce each one of you gentlemen, I'd like for you to come to the podium and give a 3-minute opening statement. First, we're going to hear from Mr. Michael Badnarik of Austin, Texas. He's a computer programmer and technical trainer. In the 1980s, he worked on the stealth bomber project and at the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant in California. For the past 3 years, Mr. Badnarik has been teaching an 8-hour class on the Constitution. He recently published a book on that document titled, "It's Good to Be King, The Foundations of Freedom." Mr. Badnarik.
Good evening, fellow delegates. Good evening, fellow Americans. I'd like to share a quote from George Washington. Government is not reason. Government is not eloquence. It is force. And like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. If you live in a log cabin, you require fire for your survival. You use the fire to heat your home and to cook your food. Fire is such a necessary part of your survival that you create a special place for fire. It is called a fireplace. Government is necessary for our survival. We need government in order to survive. The Founding Fathers created a special place for government. It is called the Constitution. Anytime the fire is in the fireplace, it is a good fire. Anytime a fire gets outside of the fireplace, it is a bad fire. Conversely, anytime the government stays within the limitations of the Constitution, it is a good government. Anytime the government is outside the Constitution, it is a bad government, and it is time for us to stomp it out. Yeah. My job as your presidential nominee and as President of the United States would be to limit Congress to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and to dissuade the Supreme Court from trying to legislate from the bench. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Mr. Aaron Russo, who's a movie, television, Broadway, and music producer whose projects have been awarded an Emmy, a Tony, and multiple Golden Globe and Academy Award nominations. In 1998, Mr. Russo challenged Nevada's Republican governor, Kenny Guinn, in the Republican primary, garnering 25.9% of the vote in a 4-way race. His political career also includes fighting successfully for medical marijuana legislation in Nevada. Mr. Russo.
I feel like I'm on my bar mitzvah. Anyway, listen, I'm going to break the rules a little bit, which I'm known to do anyway, because there's been a lot of scuttlebutt going on here between my campaign and Gary Nolan's campaign. And I think it's very, very important that we understand. Gary, would you come up here a second, please? I'm going to break. I just want to, it's important. Okay. Anyway, the point was Gary and I had a meeting the other day, arranged by Ms. Mary Ruott, and we've agreed that no matter who wins this nomination, that we're going to support the other person. And that all bickering and silly stuff and character assassination and all that stuff's going to stop, because we're not the Democrats and the Republicans. We're the party of principle. Four months ago, I was sitting in LA and I got a telephone call from Richard Winger. And Richard said to me, Aaron, you got to jump into the Libertarian presidential race. And I was thinking about it anyway. And Richard that day convinced me to do it. And so I did. And in 4 months, I've gone from 100 to 1 shot to even money. And I'm really glad about that. And the reason why that's happened is because being a producer and knowing how to produce events and producing campaigns, what I want to do is bring the Libertarian Party to where it's never been before. And what we've been able to do in my campaign is we're beating Ralph Nader right now on internet visits, all right, to my website. We're beating him. Now, right now, as I sit here talking to you, we're running TV commercials on television, on ABC, NBC, Fox News, in prime time, okay? We've commissioned a poll. That poll shows that we can make the debates this year. That poll puts me at 19% of the vote when people understand that I will stop the war in Iraq and bring our troops home. Immediately. 19%. What we have to do now is make certain that we have ballot access on all the states across this country. If I win the nomination tomorrow and we start raising money, the next day, the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and any other state that needs ballot access will start money for my campaign to make sure we get on the vote, on the ballot.
Thank you.
Am I done?
That's your time.
I'm a long-winded guy. I just got the stop button. So long.
Thanks. Next, we're going to hear from Gary Nolan of Cleveland, Ohio, who's a longtime radio talk show host. From 1998 to 2002, he hosted Nolan at Night, which was carried on 65 affiliates on the Radio America Network. From 1997 to 1999, Mr. Nolan also served as president of the Washington-based watchdog group Capitol Watch. In 1999, Mr. Nolan publicly left the Republican Party and joined the Libertarian Party. Mr. Nolan.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Libertarian Party is about to embark on a journey to educate American voters. And it's going to be an opportunity for America to prosper. It's going to be an opportunity for Americans to be safe in their neighborhoods and safe as tourists and safe as a country. It's going to be an opportunity for America to have affordable health care. It's going to be an opportunity for America to see the benefits of liberty. We're going to show Americans how they can prosper, how we can create job opportunities for the poor and the middle class, how we can create for them wealth, how we can create jobs, how we can make this a secure nation by following the Constitution. We're going to give it more than lip service. We're going to follow it to the letter. And America will be better off for having us do it. This is an opportunity for America. This is an opportunity for the Libertarian Party. We're going to go further than we've ever gone before. We're going to take this party to the top. Where do you want to go, folks? Do you want to go to the top? Let's go to the top. You want to go to the top. We're going to do it. Carpe diem. Thank you.
Mr. Nolan. Mr. Nolan, if you could just keep your place for a moment.
Yes.
I'm going to let you stand there at the mic because we're going to try to keep and mix up the order of the questions here. I will be asking all of the questions. Each of you will have 90 seconds to respond, and if we have a follow-up, try to keep your responses to 30 seconds on the follow-up, and avoid asking each other questions. I've got a few myself. And we'll begin in the order of Mr. Nolan, Mr. Russo, and Mr. Badnarik will answer this question in that order. Mr. Nolan, you're in a region which has seen both the good and the bad side of our nation's trade policies. Here in Atlanta, the home of Coca-Cola, global trade has sparked tremendous growth. And yet, just a few miles away, in many parts of the South, there are small towns that have been devastated by the flight of the textile and furniture industries. Should our trade policy continue along the path to a more open global market, and what, if any, protections need to be put in place for American workers?
Thank you. No protections need to be put in place for free trade. Free trade is what brings the costs down for consumers. And it is a net gain for America to have free trade. That said, that does not mean that I'm in favor of NAFTA or GATT. Neither one of them provide true free trade, and that ought to be worked out as a treaty through the Senate. So free trade, no restraint.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you could now take your seat, and Mr. Russo, if you could answer that same question.
I would dissolve NAFTA and GATT in a second. GATT is 22,000 pages. It weighs 365 pounds, and nobody's even read it who voted for it. The problem with losing jobs overseas is a problem of the Federal Reserve. They have destroyed our currency in this country, raising the cost of living, the cost of wages here beyond understanding. They have depreciated the dollar, the value of our currency. When you buy a home for $100,000 and a couple of years later it's worth $200,000, your home did not go up in value. The dollar went down in value. That is the absolute essence of our economic problems in America. That's why we have trade problems. We should have open, free trade without any government interference. If we're going to have free trade, it should be one paragraph. We have free trade. Nothing else. Thank you. I have to go.
And Mr. Badnarik.
The United States is the greatest economic country in the world, not because of government regulation, but in spite of it. NAFTA and GATT have about as much to do with free trade as the Patriot Act has to do with liberty. How can we possibly have free trade when Alan Greenspan can jockey the interest rate up and down? If Alan Greenspan sneezes in the morning, the Japanese stock market drops 20 points. We need to get the government out of regulating trade so that American workers can do what they do best, and that is to create wealth.
Thank you. Mr. Russo, we're going to begin with you on this next question, and that'll be followed by Mr. Badnarik and Mr. Nolan. One of the hottest political issues in the country this year is the issue of whether persons of the same sex should be allowed to marry and assume the same legal rights and responsibilities now accorded to men and women who marry. Would you state your position on this issue and talk about how that fits in your general philosophy as a libertarian?
Let's understand something. When you see the question on television, should gays be able to be married legally, you're not hearing the right question. The right question is, should the government license marriage? That's the question. When government licenses marriage, that means they're giving you a privilege. Government doesn't grant a privilege to get married. It's your human right to be married. They don't license baptisms. They didn't license my bar mitzvah, okay? And they have no right to license marriage. Take government out of the marriage business. Thank you.
The Declaration of Independence states, all men are created equal. And in 1776, that's exactly what they meant. Women could not vote, women could not own property, and blacks were considered property. After 200 years of enlightenment, we have realized that gender and race are inappropriate distinctions for determining who has individual rights. The government gives you permission. They let you know that you have permission by giving you a permit or a license. If you have a marriage license, what do you have permission to do now that you did not have permission to do before? Who gave you that permission, and where did they get the authority to give you that permission in the first place? You live with anyone you want. It is not the government's priority to set those standards.
Mr. Nolan.
So difficult to follow these gentlemen after a question like that. No, you don't need a license to make your communion. You don't need a license for your bar mitzvah. You don't need a license for your baptism. Marriage, ladies and gentlemen, is for lovers, not the government. And as much as I want the Democrats out of my wallet, I want the Republicans out of my bedroom.
Next series is going to go to Mr. Badnarik, Mr. Nolan, and then Mr. Russo. So, Mr. Badnarik, libertarians advocate reducing the role of government and increasing private enterprise. But in the past year or so, we've seen some disastrous cases in which private contractors hired by the United States to work in Iraq have engaged in price gouging on the one hand, and been associated with the worst excesses against Iraqi prisoners. It doesn't look like the privatization of war is proceeding very well. Using libertarian principles, how would you straighten out this mess?
First thing that I would do would be to correct the characterization of our companies in Iraq as private enterprise. When the government selects one specific company to go into that country with carte blanche to do whatever they want, that is a government-controlled monopoly. It would only be free market if there were other companies there to offer competitive services and competitive prices to keep the services down, and also to allow the Iraqis to choose which of those companies is providing the service. None of those conditions exist, so it is not a free market system in Iraq.
Thank you. Mr. Nolan.
Probably the first thing we ought to do to correct this problem in Iraq is to end the occupation of Iraq. That said, Michael is right. If there is no competition, it's not the free market. Competition is what drives us to excellence. It's what makes us work to excel. It's what makes America first. And it's what we should strive to achieve individually and in business. So let's bring the troops home and let's end the problem. Thank you.
Mr. Russo.
Let us understand something. America has become a fascist country. And by fascist, I mean the government and the corporations working together to stifle the people. What's happening in Iraq is part of that fascist government. Those corporations over there work hand in hand with our government. They're mercenaries. They don't belong there. We don't belong in Iraq at all. And because we're in Iraq and we've started a preemptive war, we have made the world a much more dangerous place. Because now China can invade Taiwan and say terrorism, and Pakistan can invade India and say terrorism. And terrorism has become a buzzword for war and for a country doing whatever it pleases. So when you talk about the mercenaries and private enterprise, in my view, does not belong in war. Thank you very much.
Nolan, we're going to begin with you for the next question, followed by Mr. Badnarik and Mr. Russo, and we're going to keep on the same subject. There are a lot of things about the Patriot Act and the war on terrorism that you might choose to criticize and that your party has been critical of. But let's turn the clock back to the morning of September 11th, 2001. From that crucial point, could you lay out briefly how you would have coped with the threat facing the nation, and what would you have hoped to have accomplished by now?
What I would have done was get the evidence gathered into the hands of Congress and let them decide whether or not the indications were that we should be declaring war anywhere. It's not a job to be abdicated to the president. If the evidence indicated, in fact, that we should be going to war, then the primary job would have been, in this case, to go after the Taliban who were protecting al-Qaeda. Weakness in the face of aggression invites aggression. If we have the evidence and it proves that they are responsible, we need to respond. That said, we had no reason to invade Iraq. Thank you.
Libertarians are very strong on defense, but we also want the evidence. We need to know exactly who did what and why. Congress has the power to declare war. They also have the power to issue letters of marque and reprisal. Instead of sending 100,000 troops overseas, we could probably send a smaller group of U.S. Navy SEALs or Army Rangers and get the people who actually did this. But we need to have the evidence. Congress does not have the authority to grant the president carte blanche to go off and do whatever he chooses to do. I'm a bit concerned about the fact that Osama bin Laden was originally labeled as the culprit who perpetrated this atrocity. How have we gone from Osama bin Laden to Saddam Hussein? Where is the logic that allowed us to switch from Afghanistan to Iraq?
Well, we finally have a division in our thoughts. If I were president of 9/11, I would have gotten the evidence of who did it, shown it to the people. I would not have gone to Congress to declare war. I would have gone, no matter where they were, whoever did it, I would have gone to any border with a police action and not declare war and gotten the SOBs who did that, no matter where they were in the world. Okay? I don't think that a war against some force that we don't know who it is a war. It's a police action. And the president doesn't have to go to Congress for a police action. And I certainly would not have removed the Taliban from Afghanistan or invaded Afghanistan with our troops. The Taliban had nothing to do with what happened. And as a matter of fact, the Taliban said to George Bush, give us the evidence of what happened and we'll give you Osama bin Laden. And what George Bush did was he said, I don't have to give it to you, I've already given it to Tony Blair. As if that matters, right? So I would not have invaded Afghanistan, but I would have gotten the people who did it, no matter where they were, by a police action, and I would not have declared war. Thank you.
Mr. Russo, if you could keep your place there. I've saved this next question just for you to begin.
Excuse me?
I say I've saved this next question just for you to begin, and then we're going to go to Mr. Nolan and Mr. Badnarik. When Janet Jackson's breast was exposed...
Yes.
During the Super Bowl halftime
Yes.
this year.
Excuse me. I love this question.
Congress moved very quickly, and it bumped up the penalty airways from $27,500 to $500,000. Howard Stern got bumped off the Clear Channel network. 2 local DJs here in Atlanta got fired. And yet the photos from Abu Ghraib have been broadcast and published all over the world, and the most widely sought website, according to a story last week, is the one that shows Alan Berg's beheading. Should government have any role at all in enforcing public decency, and what should it be?
If the media would have spent as much time on the Patriot Act as they did on Janet Jackson's breast, we wouldn't have a Patriot Act today. You understand that? The FCC should be closed down. The government has nothing to do with decency. We can decide our own decency, thank you. And I've decided for myself my whole life. Some people don't like my decision on decency. I've been criticized, but we can decide our own. We can all decide our own. We have our own limits. Parents decide decency with their children, not the government. Get the government out of decency questions. They don't belong there. The government is there for one reason, to protect our freedoms. That's what they're for. And so, did I answer your question completely?
Yes.
Sometimes I get off track. Thank you very much.
Mr. Nolan.
Ladies and gentlemen, when you are exposed to something on the radio or television that you find offensive, censor yourself. Turn it off. That's censorship. To rely on the government to determine what you should and should not see is a false sense of security. Turn it off. If you don't want your children to watch it, if they offend you, don't watch it next time. There is no surer way in broadcasting to force them to change their methods than to lose numbers. Let the free market decide. Thank you.
Mr. Badnarik.
I did not see the halftime show. But I am certain that Janet Jackson's breast is not the most obscene thing that we have seen on television. When we have a Democratic president using the Oval Office on a regular basis for his little tryst, I find that far more offensive. I find it very offensive when the government tells me what I can and cannot watch. I actually find Jerry Springer far more offensive, and so I turn him off. people should decide what is or is not obscene, and they will make that decision by watching or not watching reality TV. Censor yourself.
We're going to have a round with Mr. Nolan, Mr. Badnarik, and Mr. Russo.
This is the most exercise I've gotten in 3 weeks, you know.
It's a little bit like a Chinese restaurant menu, keeping track of all of you, too, I think. Mr. Nolan, one of the most striking things about this election is how few people are undecided about it, even though we're months away from Election Day. It's one of the most polarized political atmospheres that most experts can remember. Libertarian ideas have a lot of influence on both sides of the ideological divide, but the pool of voters with a completely open mind is getting smaller. So from this starting point, how do you propose to build the Libertarian Party, and what opportunities are there right now that the party could take advantage of to increase its influence?
One of the first places that we need, first of all, let me talk about these people who don't vote. Sadly, we don't have enough time to go into all the details, but they don't vote because they don't perceive a difference between the two parties, when in fact, there is a difference. There is a difference, folks. It's which special interest group is going to feed at the trough first. That's the difference. When voters no longer feel that it makes a difference no matter which side gets in, they don't bother to vote. It doesn't change their lives. We're going to offer them an opportunity to take their lives back. If you are a fiscal conservative, you cannot vote for George Bush. If you look at what happened when we had a balance of powers with a Democrat in the White House, the Republican legislature, the rate of growth was 2.5% to 3%. It is currently 7% to 10% for the party of small government, and they have the House, the Senate, and the White House. If you want small government, you can't vote for George Bush, but you can vote for Gary Nolan. Yeah! That's going to make a difference. Thank you.
As I have traveled back and forth across the United States campaigning over the last 18 months, one of the things that has been most striking is the number of Democrats and Republicans who are becoming disillusioned with the status quo. City after city, I have non-libertarians coming up to me asking me what they can do to change things. And after I explain the Libertarian platform to them, they go, well, of course. That's exactly what we think the United States should be. Out of all the possible voters, the people who are eligible to vote, sadly, only 20 to 25% actually take the time to go to the polls. That leaves 75% of the people who are unwilling to vote for the lesser of two evils. If we can get the libertarian message out there, we can take that 75% and we can make a significant change in government. Help us get that message out to the people.
Michael said the right thing. If we can get the message out. That's why I'm running. I will get the message out. Okay? Let's understand something. We need television advertising. We need to be running 30-second television commercials all over America talking about why the Libertarian Party is the only way to go. We need polling data. We need campaign managers. The Libertarian Party still doesn't have campaign managers like Ed Rollins and Dick Morris. We have to become professional. The man's question was, how are we going to get the message out? That's what faces us. That's why I'm here. That's why I entered into the race, because I felt I can get this message out. It's critical we get this message out. There are 4 things we have to do. We need television. We need polling data. we need publicity, and we need ballot access. That's what we must do to get the message out. And once we have polling data, then you can start using that polling data. And let me give you an example. One of the questions we asked on the poll we just did was what percentage of voters, non-voters, would vote for Aaron Russo as opposed to registered voters. We beat John Kerry in that category. We beat John Kerry in non-voters. We have to reach the non-voters through television. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to caution all the candidates to pay attention to our timekeeper down here on the front row. This next round for Mr. Badnarik, Mr. Russo, and Mr. Nolan. Mr. Badnarik, our Senator Zell Miller here in Georgia has been one of the very few people in Washington to suggest that the nation's current military needs could warrant a return to the draft. It's been argued that a draft system without the exemptions of the Vietnam era might have a great democratizing impact on the country. But it's also been predicted that such a change would swiftly lead to the end of all consensus over the war on terrorism. But given the current pressures on the volunteer military and the reserves, is there any justification for a draft?
Imagine. People are not volunteering to go to foreign countries and die the way they used to. Imagine that. In World War II, when Americans truly believed in the issue, young men were lying about their age to get into the military early. Americans rallied behind that war. If you cannot get your citizens to rally behind your war, perhaps, just perhaps, it's an invalid war. The United States has far more military than any other country in the world. We have military in 130 countries around the world. Instead of doing international offense, perhaps we can bring those soldiers home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and limit them to doing national defense.
Mr. Russo.
As most of you know, I have been fighting the military draft since December, when people said, Aaron, you're crazy, it's never going to happen. And it is happening. On my website, we have a petition signed by thousands and thousands of people to stop the military draft. The Department of Defense put on their website a posting looking for men to man the draft boards. We put that posting on my website. The next day, the Department of Defense took it off their website, okay? Hillary Clinton, old Hillary, came out and said the other day that a volunteer army is not adequate any longer. She's right, because the war in Iraq stinks, okay? They put $28 million in the budget to man the draft boards. The Rangel-Hollings bill is in Congress right now in committee, waiting to come out of committee until after the election. This war in Iraq is a disaster, it's immoral, it's wrong. When I'm president, I will bring our troops home immediately. I will close our bases down overseas and make America a nation that protects its borders. And I'm not saying put the troops on the borders, don't misunderstand me. A nation that protects its own people and its country and doesn't get involved in other countries' problems. Because when you get involved in other countries' problems, they become your problems. Enough.
Thank you. Mr. Nolan.
know, ladies and gentlemen, we do not need a draft. You know, we keep hearing about the war history from John Kerry and George Bush. I want to hear about their peace history. We talk about an exit strategy for Iraq. I want to know what the exit strategy is for Germany. I want to know what the exit strategy excuse me. I want to know what the exit strategy is for Japan. I want to know what the exit strategy is for Korea. We don't have to have a draft. We frankly have more military than we've ever needed. We are not the world's police department. Let's bring the military home.
We'll reverse this order again and go with Mr. Russo, Mr. Badnarik, and Mr. Nolan on the next question. Mr. Russo, your party has proposed a number of market-based solutions to our health care problems. I'd like for you to focus right now on the area of prescription drugs. Drug companies argue that the higher cost of drugs in the United States underwrite the research which continually improves the quality of their product. But the door has been opened now to allow Americans to purchase drugs in Canada. The cost of the prescription drug benefit programs turned out to be far larger than it was represented, and we seem to be coming to a critical point on this question. What should the government do, if anything, about prescription drugs?
Get out of it. Real simple. Get out of health care. Get out of drugs. They don't belong there. It's not their business. And I'm a big devotee of alternative medicine, preventive medicine. The whole thing about medicine is this: build up your immune system so you don't get sick in the first place, so you don't need their drugs. Do you understand? It's your immune system that protects you. It's your immune system that defends you. And it's our job to build our immune system so we are protected, not to take drugs after we get sick. Doctors don't prevent you from getting sick. And the cost of drugs, again, comes because of government regulation and because the Federal Reserve has destroyed the currency of this country, driving the price of everything up. So health care is no longer affordable. Get the government out of the health care business. Thank you.
Congress doesn't seem to know anything about the Constitution, which is their job. How much less do they know about medicine? Government regulation drives up the cost of producing these drugs. It cost $1 billion to get a drug from the table, the science table, out to the marketplace. You, the consumers, are ultimately going to pay that price. American drug companies sell those drugs to Canada. And when Americans try to purchase those drugs at a cheaper price, the FDA says you're not allowed to do that because those drugs aren't safe. If those drugs aren't safe, why did you sell them to Canada? Anytime the government does anything, it drives up the cost and it doesn't work. Get the government out of medicine.
I don't know where the glass of water came from, but I'm going to give him the Congressional Medal of Honor for that. Let's get the government out of health care, you bet. It costs in excess of $1 billion to get a pharmaceutical through the FDA's testing process. A testing process that is so poor that aspirin wouldn't pass today. And it still uses animals in its testing process. If you have $1 billion price tag on that testing, what small or foreign pharmaceutical company can compete? They can't. You now have a government-protected monopoly for the major pharmaceutical industries to gouge Americans for medicine. But the most expensive part is that 10-year delay that costs thousands of American lives every year. It was at the behest of the Food and Drug Administration that AIDS patients who went to Japan to get medicine in the 80s had their medicine confiscated when they came back to the United States by customs. Let's get rid of the Food and Drug Administration. Thank you.
We're going to have our next round for Mr. Badnarik, Mr. Nolan, and Mr. Russo. And Mr. Badnarik, one of the themes when we went into Afghanistan and Iraq was that we were bringing the benefits of democracy, the free market, and social tolerance. We've insisted women be included in government councils in Afghanistan and imposed a flat tax on Iraq. Can you export ideas like that? And what larger responsibility does our country have to bring to other parts of the world the ideas that we believe in?
First of all, the Founding Fathers loathed a democracy, calling it a tyranny of the majority. The United States is not a democracy. The United States is a constitutional republic based on private property and individual rights. In the 1860s, we passed the 13th Amendment, which presumably eliminated slavery, and it took well over 100 years to erase the racial hatred between the whites and the blacks. How do the American government think that they can go into another country and override thousands of years of culture? It is not our job to export anything except products and services.
It is neither our job nor our responsibility to export any of those services or freedoms. And I think it's curious that while I don't particularly care for the flat tax any more than the income tax, that at least they're granting them that privilege instead of this graduated income tax that we have. It is not our job to get involved in nation building. And I remember George Bush promising not to get involved in nation building. And I see the United States involved in nation building. So let's bring them home and let's not try to export our beliefs. Thank you.
Going third is not good. Michael took my whole speech away. But for the audience at home, maybe I can clarify one thing for the people watching on television. In a democracy, 51% of the people control 51% the majority, control 49% the minority. That's not freedom, folks. In a constitutional republic, as America was founded as, 99% of the people couldn't take away the rights of 1%. They're your rights. I hear somebody's phone ringing. So, for the people at home, because I know all us libertarians here understand this already, recognize the fact that America is not supposed to be a democracy. And when we talk about democracy, bringing it overseas, what we're talking about is bringing about something from here that doesn't even belong here either, right? So forget about democracy in Iraq. Get out of Iraq. Leave the Iraqi people to their own self-determination. Thank you.
Go to Mr. Russo, if you could return to the mic and we'll ask you a question. We'll try to keep in order here. This is a related question, but maybe one that's it's a little bit more involved. How much can the United States do, and how much should it do to either restrain or encourage the Israeli government in its efforts to combat Palestinian terrorism?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Say that again.
How much could it do, or how much should it do to either encourage or restrain the Israeli government in its efforts to combat Palestinian terrorism?
Well, my own personal view is, and I'm a Jewish boy, is that the American government, the federal, has no place in Israel or Palestine. Okay? If I were the president, I would go there, I would talk to them, I would try and make them understand why they should have peace. And if they can't get peace, go kill each other and leave us out of it. Make your own way. You cannot get dragged into other people's battles. As I said before, when you take on another country's problems, they become your problems. We are not the policemen of the world. We have to we have many people here that need to be taken care of. We need to bring our privacy policies here at home so that people in America have a free country to live in, free of regulation, free of restriction. Let's focus on making America the perfect place to live, where liberty is all. Freedom is the answer for everything, folks. If we're all free, we will have a magnificent country. Get out of Israel.
Nolan.
We have no place in the Middle East. It is not for us to decide how they settle their peace, and in fact, our history would indicate that we've done nothing but exacerbate the problems. Every American who's working hard and forced to pay taxes to the federal government should be enraged at the thought that their money is being sent to any other country, including Israel, or to support the Palestinians. So let's not get involved in civil wars and border disputes that don't involve national security. Let's quit creating enemies. That's our job in the Middle East.
Our founding fathers were very wise. George Washington's farewell address, he encouraged us to establish economic ties with all countries and establish entangling alliances with none. Besides, we establish at least one enemy. If we give money to one government, the people that they are fighting hate us. Occasionally, the government, in its very finite wisdom, chooses to fund both sides of the encounter, apparently believing that by giving both sides money that both sides will love us. Apparently it never occurs to Congress that if we give money to both sides will hate us for funding their enemy. Within the United States are free to do anything they want with their personal funds. But it is immoral to tax Arabs and send that to Israel, or to tax the Jews and to send that to the Arabs. We need to stay out of entangling alliances.
Thank you. Our next round is going to go to Mr. Nolan, Mr. Russo, and then to Mr. Badnarik. Mr. Nolan, for those who believe in the free market, a trip to the pump these days can be a real test. Gas is up over $2 in much of the country, and while that price may come down, many experts say that we are about to enter into a period in which oil and gas supplies won't be able to keep up with skyrocketing demand, particularly from China. What's your outline of a national energy policy, and how would you implement it?
One of the first things that we need to do is allow the oil companies to build refineries again. We need to let them explore for oil. Yes, if that means opening up Anwar to exploration, an area the size of South Carolina, they can drill in an area the size of Dulles Airport. We have vast opportunities to drill for oil around the coast of the United States. They can do it safely, and they can bring competition to the marketplace. That's how you drive the cost of fuel down. You let the free market do its job. Thank you.
If I can just ask, I'm going to ask a follow-up to this question, and we'll ask the same question of each of you. Do you favor any kind of tax incentive for fuel-efficient or alternative fuel?
No, no. I think that's a pretty poor idea myself.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a somewhat different view. The oil reserve, I believe that we have to protect our environment. And I believe that the oil up in Alaska is I know it to be a 6-week supply. That's it. What we have to do in America is build alternative means of energy. I personally don't want to see more drilling off the coasts. I don't. You can boo me. It's okay. I don't want to see more drilling off the coast. There are better ways of doing it. I am not here. I don't like the oil companies. I think they're part of the fascist government we have today. And we're in Iraq for oil. And I don't think giving them the right to build more, they should build refineries, but the right to explore more and take out from our oceans and take out from Alaska and destroy our environment, I don't think is a wise way to go. I think the Libertarian Party has never had a good policy on the environment. I've never heard a good one, and I've been looking for one for months, and I'm open to find new ideas on how we can handle the environment. Because on this issue, to tell you the truth, there's a bit of confusion in my mind, but the stock answer that I've been hearing about the environment is not good, in my view. Sue your neighbor, sue this one, sue that one. Those aren't good answers for me. So I say, let's find alternative means of energy. Build wind power, build sun power. There's other ways to go. Thank you.
I am flattered that so many delegates here at the convention consider me a constitutional expert. Allow me to impress you with my economic wisdom. All you need to know about economics is the law of supply and demand. When the supply of something goes down, the price of it will go up. And as the price of gasoline goes up, the consumer at the pump is going to provide the incentive for finding alternative sources. If we continue paying 75 cents a gallon, there's no need for alternative fuel supplies. If we get the government out of regulating medicine, the economy, and everything else, then the free market will find its own course.
You want to stay there and we'll We're just going to reverse this and go to Mr. Badnarik, Mr. Nolan, and Mr. Russo on this. And since we're in an environmental frame of mind, there's recently been a very popular movie which spelled out some very drastic possibilities for global warming. But in addition to that, there have been some serious studies by the Department of Defense and by an internationally recognized group of underwriters raising serious questions about what could happen in the decades ahead if the climate were to change. Should that be a concern of government at all, and what would a libertarian administration do about that?
Again, the free market is probably the best way to handle any problem. Government has power, and when you allow the government power to influence a situation, there's going to be corruption. If we have scientists who are out there doing studies on global warming and we get that information to the general public, once again, the free market will allow us to control the situation. Nobody wants to live in a place where the ice caps are melting and, San Francisco is flooding. And I think that if we get that information to the people and offer logical, reasonable alternatives, people will follow their survival and they will do the right thing.
Mr. Nolan.
If we in this country are concerned about the environment, perhaps we should go after the biggest polluters. So let's start with the federal government. They pollute more than the 5 largest chemical companies combined. I will take away their sovereign immunity. I will hold their feet to the fire and make them accountable. In Great Britain, if you have waterfront property, you own the fishing rights to that property. If the person upstream pollutes, everybody downstream can hold them accountable. I would give people with waterfront property in this country the fishing rights to that property. I would no longer allow the government to own that property, because the government doesn't take care of the environment, but people do. The Environmental Protection Agency itself actually protects polluters. When you see a plant belching out pollution, it's because they've grandfathered them in, and they did that because they got their marching orders from Congress, and Congress got their money from the polluters. Let's give the people the power to protect their own property. Thank you.
I'm not sure the question I heard and what Mr. Nolan answered were the same. So do me a favor, can you give me the question again?
You know, you've asked me the one question that I've lost in this group of questions I've asked. So I may have to paraphrase.
Well, I may not be able to answer it then. Are we talking about pollution, or are we talking about ice caps coming down?
We are talking
and government's
about,
role in,
yeah.
What are we talking about?
We're talking about global policy toward global warming. There was this recent movie, which seems to be exaggerated in many respects, but there have been some serious studies that have talked about some very dramatic impacts from global warming and global effects over the next decades. Should there be any policy at all to address this, and what should it be?
To address global warming?
Yes.
Is that the government's role? Is that what you're asking me?
Yes.
No. Anything else? No.
If you have, just to ask you, just to follow up, if you are concerned about the environment, is that not part of, shouldn't that be part of your concern?
I'm very concerned about the environment, but I think the free market can, if there's a problem with holes in the atmosphere and global warming, it would be my assumption that there could be a lot of money made by stopping it. And I assume that the free market would find a way to make a lot of money to stop it. My view on the environment before was, the question you asked was about alternative sources of energy, and should people be allowed to dig up in Alaska. And I don't think the amount of oil we can get in Alaska, which is 6 weeks, is worth what we can. I don't think it's worth the effort. I think what we have to do for real stability. Look, we're past peak oil in the world, folks. We are past peak oil. And once you understand that, the whole thing about oil and pollution goes away. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. We'll proceed now to Mr. Badnarik, Mr. Russo, and Mr. Nolan on this next question. Mr. Badnarik, a lot of economic indicators are up right now, but job production and public confidence in the economy continues to lag. What needs to be done to get the economy back to where it was in the 90s? Or can we do that? Or in a Libertarian administration, should you do that?
Well, I'm glad I get to go first. The Libertarian Party would, first of all, eliminate the IRS, giving everybody in the United States a 35% pay increase immediately instead of a $300 rebate of your own money. The cost of goods and services, 20% of the cost of goods and services goes to filling out IRS forms. So the cost is going to be dropped by 20%. The economy would skyrocket with everybody having all that loose cash in their pockets. The other thing that we have to do is eliminate the Federal Reserve. In 1876 and 1860, we had zero inflation, and the American economy was stable and strong. We established the Federal Reserve in 1913. They have been printing fiat paper money ever since, making your money worthless. We got to get back to a commodity-based currency so that we can essentially have a stable economy.
You asked about the 1990s. The 1990s was an era when the economy was pushed by massive injections of liquidity by the Fed, by a massive amount of derivatives being put into the marketplace, which is a way of creating more money, more credit being established. I'm not sure you want an economy like the 1990s with a stock market mania and a bubble. So I think your question is faulty from the get-go. What we need in this country is a stable currency, a stable environment where people know from year to year what their money's going to be worth, what they can buy next year, where they can have savings again. Everybody in America is in debt. We have a debt-based system here and induces children to go into debt when they go to college and never get out of debt. They want you in debt all the time, like slaves on a plantation. So the 1990s is not a good analogy. It's not a good benchmark. What we need in this country is sound currency backed by gold and silver, where the dollar is worth something, put out by the Treasury again, not by the Federal Reserve. I've been fighting the Federal Reserve for years. They must be shut down. And as far as a sound economy, the best economy we can have is one that's non-inflationary, where your money is worth the same thing year in and year out. Thank you.
Just to be sure, would you give me that question one more time, please?
I'm sorry, I've lost my place.
I'll extemporize for a while.
Go ahead, yeah. Yes, there are a lot of economic indicators that are up, but job production and public confidence in the economy continues to lag. And my question was, what, if anything, needs to be done to get the economy back to the way it was in the 90s, or should we get there?
All right. Mr. Russo and Mr. Badnarik are both right. We do need to get rid of the Federal Reserve and get rid of the fiat currency. But we also, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. What we also have to do is quit punishing Americans for working hard. Let's reduce the size of the federal government to its constitutionally mandated limits, get rid of the IRS, quit punishing people for working, quit punishing them more for saving and investing, and allow them to go out and buy the goods and services they need to protect and raise their families. Because when they've got that money in their hands and they go out and buy a safer car for their children to bring to drive to school in, when they use that money to put their children in a private school, they create demand for labor. That puts people to work. That creates a hot economy. And that's what we need to do. Get the government to get rid of the income tax and the regulations that are crushing business. Thank you.
I have a round of questions now from Mr. Russo, Mr. Badnarik, and Mr. Nolan, and I believe we're getting close to our final statements also. Mr. Russo, it doesn't take a libertarian to realize that in Iraq, the United States has entered into an expensive and long-term commitment with no certainty about the outcome and a declining consensus over whether it was worth doing in the first place. But where is the next long-term foreign policy commitment that a libertarian should be alert to? What other problems and what other countries around the world are warning signs that, that libertarians should anticipate could cause a long-term commitment in the future?
I love the question. In my view, I say close down all our military bases overseas. Bring our troops home from overseas. Stop meddling in other people's businesses. And I believe if we behave responsibly and trade with other nations freely and fairly, that we won't have a problem with overseas countries. Why can America have all these weapons? Why do we spend more money on our defense than the next 25 nations combined? Why do we have bases in 135 countries around the world? We are the imperialistic nation in this world today. We are not. I would like to make the Libertarian Party the party of peace. Let's return to being a peaceful nation again, and let's lead by example and not by force. Thank you.
Mr. Nolan.
Somebody graciously gave me a lozenge. I think I can speak now. You wanted to know what long-term commitment libertarians need to be aware of?
I want to know, looking around the world right now, what other countries and what other possible predicaments should the United States look to and avoid so that it can avoid a situation like we have in Iraq?
Well, until or unless Canada or Mexico are attacked, I don't think we're really on the verge of needing to worry too much about our military and national security. Look, we have a military presence in 144 countries. Every time we choose up sides, every time we get involved in a civil war or a border dispute, we create an enemy. Side with Israel, Palestinians, your enemy. Side with Kuwait, Iraq is your enemy. Quit creating enemies and you don't need to worry about what the military involvements are going to be, because there aren't going to be any. If you want to avoid sending the military overseas and having them involved in a commitment, keep the lines of communication open through trade. Nobody wants to shoot their customer. Thank you.
Mr. Badnarik.
I have to go third. We don't need to be involved in foreign entanglements. We don't have any one particular place that we need to avoid. We need to avoid them all. Bring our troops home so they can be home for the holidays, and we don't have to have nearly as many USO shows.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. And now we will go into a period of 5-minute closing statements. And by prior agreement, our first closing statement will be from Mr. Nolan.
Thank you. America has an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to take back its liberty, to take back its freedom, to take back the Constitution. America has an opportunity to create a strong economy with opportunities for the poor and the middle class. America has an opportunity to protect its environment. It has an opportunity to be secure as a nation. All we need do is dig up that Constitution that our founding fathers left us, the blueprint for government, and adhere to it. The benefits to liberty are endless. And we are the only party that's willing and the only party that are able to fulfill the promise of the Founding Fathers. It is their vision that enabled us to go from a third world country to a world superpower. And we intend to bring that vision back. That vision of liberty. There are among us cynics who believe we will not achieve federal office. And to those cynics, I want to remind you that in the course of human endeavors, when we have encountered obstacles and dared to dream, we've been able to overcome them. When Christopher Columbus decided to sail and prove that the world wasn't flat, he opened up the doors from Europe to the New World. And the rest of Europe followed. Because he dared to dream. because he had the tenacity and the perseverance to follow through. When Roger Bannister decided that he would try to break the 4-minute mile and doctors said, "You can't do it, it'll kill you," he dared to dream. He persevered and he opened the doors for other athletes to break even his record. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I dare to dream. I dare to dream that we can bring back liberty to this country. I dare to dream that we can put libertarians in federal office. I dare to dream that we can make this the strongest economy, the safest nation, the nation our founding fathers envisioned. I invite you to dream, to be tenacious, to persevere, to believe in yourself, and to believe in the Constitution. And let's bring America back. We can do it. Thank you.
The preamble of the Constitution establishes some of the reasons why that document was drafted. In part, to establish justice, promote domestic tranquility, and provide for the common defense. The Constitution establishes the principles for peace and tranquility. Every time we abide by the Constitution, we get peace and tranquility. Violating the supreme law of the land gets the opposite. It destroys our economy, gets us entangled into foreign wars. It is principles set down for us by our founding fathers. As a libertarian candidate, I frequently face the wasted vote syndrome. People tell me that I'm a good candidate. They believe in what I stand for, but they can't bring themselves to vote for me because they don't want to waste their vote. If you were in prison and you had a 50% chance of lethal injection, a 45% chance of going to the electric chair, and only a 5% chance of escape, are you likely to vote for lethal injection because that is your most likely outcome? Your survival depends on voting for escape, even if that's only a 5% chance. If you continue to vote for the Democrats or the Republicans, you are committing political suicide. The only chance we have of saving our constitutional republic is to vote libertarian, even if that's only a 5% probability of getting into office. To demonstrate that we are not satisfied with the status quo, voting for the lesser of two evils, and your candidate wins, and you still get evil. The Libertarian Party is the party of principle. We have candidates in every state, in every county, that are principled, passionate, and articulate. Please vote Libertarian and help us restore a free country.
I say let's have more than a 5% chance. Raise our chances up. Now, many people say we libertarians are radical. But what's really radical is the government making laws they have no authority to make. What's radical are two political parties that constantly lie to us without consequence. What's radical is a preemptive war against a country that did us no harm. What's radical is the Patriot Act, a crime against every American. What's radical is the welfare state and the concept of redistribution of wealth. What's radical is arresting and jailing people for having their constitutional right of owning and bearing arms. What's radical is now in America, we have free speech zones. I promise you, when I'm president, all of America will be a free speech zone. What's radical is we are bringing back the military draft for men and women between the ages of 18 and 26 years old. What's radical is arresting people who are disease-ridden for smoking a weed called marijuana. I can tell you now, I have inhaled. What's radical is Bush and Kerry telling us we have a real choice in this election. We do. Me. They agree on everything. The war in Iraq, sending more troops there, big government spending, the FDA, the DEA, the Federal Reserve, the Patriot Act, and the destruction of our Bill of Rights. The real question is, what are you going to tell your children when they ask you, how did America get like this? I know that I'm doing everything in my power. I'm using every fiber of my being to fight these people, to do anything I can do to win and stop this government from doing what it's doing to us. I want to get up, look in the mirror every day and say, you know, Aaron, you did everything you could possibly do. And when I tell my children that, I want to be proud to be an American. And when I die and I have my tombstone, I want it to say, freedom fighter. A debating society. We must no longer be a debating society worrying about the freedom of an ant or a flea. We have to fight and get active. I will do civil disobedience. If they don't let us into the debates, we'll get thousands of people to go there and stop the debates from happening. That's what I stand for. And remember, we are not the property of government. Government is the property of the people. All your freedoms all the time. All your freedoms all the time. All your freedoms all the time. Thank you. Keep it going.
Thank you. Thank you. for candidates of a party that believes in limited government, there can be no higher compliment than the fact that you were given a total of 15 minutes for your closing statements, and I believe it only took about 12 or 13, so you're to be complimented. And ladies and gentlemen, as a guy who watches people do this, there is no harder job than running for public office in a country like ours, and I'd like to ask all three candidates to stand up and give them a hand, please. Good job.
All our freedoms all the time. Good job. Great job.
I guess.
Just a short announcement. The Libertarian for gay and lesbian concerns will be having a meeting at 8 o'clock in the media room. So any gays and lesbian supporters are welcome to join.
Just as a casual observer watching you, it seemed like you were pretty, like you saved all your energy for the end. Like you got your passion got more and more as you went on. Can you tell me how you felt you did in there?
Well, when you're on the stage and you have 90 seconds and you're dealing with the same questions everybody else is, your start of who you are come out. You know, I do best when I can speak to the people from my heart, you know, and so I didn't say it all. It was just a situation when you're debating, and it's not really... ...is to get it and to play for television.
What about the debate format? I mean, when you just have... I mean, is it because there aren't that many differences between all the libertarians?
Well, that's for one thing. Yeah, that's why I say I don't like the debates, because it's like watching paint dry from my point of view. You know, because pretty much we all have the same answers. We believe the same things in most instances. I disagree with Gary about Afghanistan. You know, I disagree on some of the pollution situation. I believe we need new alternative sources of energy in this country. And we should be putting tons of money, private money. So we do disagree on different issues, but most of the time we agree.
Unfortunately, we are having some audio problems with the interview with the candidate, so we're going to move on from our coverage of the Libertarian Convention at this point. We do plan on more live coverage of the convention starting tomorrow morning with nominating speeches for the presidential candidates, the roll call of the states, and finally the acceptance speech of the party's nominee. That'll begin at 9 a.m. Eastern Time here on C-SPAN.